Ooh, could you crack one for me, brother?
Anytime.
You know, it's funny. Every single time we record in this studio, there's an office complex above the studio we're recording.
Yeah.
And every single time we record, we arrive here. What time is it? It's 8:30 p.m.
Yeah.
Raf creeps up like a little goblin
Whoa.
into the darkness of the office building.
I walk with purpose.
Okay. He goes up there. He gets into the cupboards. He gets out a few beers. What do we got today? We got a Beck's. It's interesting. I feel like Beck's are less common these days. You see Beck's a little bit less common.
No. Oh, you see ads for Beck still, but no one drinking it.
No one's drinking it. No.
Well, I just open the fridge door and just pull out some...
That's cool. And then he gets some little snacks from the cupboard. Mm-hmm. And every single time I say, "That's fine, Raf. That's fine. We'll munch away from the microphone." Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, because we're rocking the Shure SM7B.
That's right. Same one that was used on Michael Jackson's Thriller. And, for that matter, Kings of Leon. Sex is on Fire.
Sex is on Fire recorded on this mic.
Yeah.
So if you feel the same sort of raw rock and roll spirit coming through, it's because we're using the same microphone. But every single time when I sit down to edit earlier in the week, I have to go through and manually remove all the munching and crunching. And I need to be so clear about it. I see red.
Yeah, well,
I get so pissed off while I'm editing it.
Okay, well, other thing, there's very few people in the world who'll turn down a snack. To snack is to be human. Snacking
is Lindy. Actually, I think snacking is the least Lindy thing that's ever existed.
Yeah, we didn't have snacks, did we? We had gorging.
Human beings have been alive for 100,000 years, 200,000 years. I don't know exactly when anatomically modern humans evolved.
I think it's more like 500,000.
Yeah. And I reckon that snacking as a concept was probably invented in the last 1,000.
It might be the last 80.
They snacked in ancient Rome.
Did they snack? Well, on grapes.
I reckon they snacked.
Did they not also have orgies, though, and that kind of gear?
That's not relevant.
No, not the sexual type. Not the Melbourne style.
Right, okay. Yeah. If you're of a certain class in ancient Rome, you're probably snacking. Then they lost the snacking technology. And
the Dark Ages.
The Dark Ages, when they lost the idea of how to snack. It became a subsistence economy. You were scrambling for any sort of nutrition, really.
Yeah.
And you had your own subsistence farms going on.
Yeah.
And then it's in 1950, I'm going to say.
Well, I feel like when high fructose corn syrup kind of entered the equation.
Yeah. That's how pizza shapes were invented. Today, we're taking a bit of a diversion. We're taking a diversion today, and we're talking about a book. I read a book that came out a couple of weeks ago. It's by Jason Schreier, a reporter at Bloomberg, and a former writer and editor at Kotaku. And it is about Blizzard, the game developer.
And I asked him if he wanted to come on, and he was very honest and just said, "I'm too tired because I've just done a tour, but I'll come on later."
That's right. He said maybe later.
So we'll talk about his book. And we admire his honesty.
We respect the honesty in saying, look, he probably Googled the pod, maybe had to listen to 5 minutes of one episode, and said, you know what? I don't think my credibility can take that hit. For some people it can. Mike Isaac, New York Times reporter, his credibility took that hit, and a handful of other characters over the years as well. Anyway, but no, this is about Blizzard Entertainment, the video game company, which then became part of Activision Blizzard, essentially, which was the largest video game publisher on the stock market.
Well, let's talk about the games. Just chuck out some games for those who aren't following the actual game publishers. You would have heard of them.
Warcraft.
World of Warcraft.
StarCraft. Overwatch. Diablo. Hearthstone. A handful of other...
But then what about Activision?
And then Activision is Call of Duty, Guitar Hero.
Guitar Hero, another huge game.
Taking you back?
Yeah, point being, these are very well-known games.
Yeah, they're big games. Activision Blizzard as the biggest pure-play game company in the world in terms of market cap. And very recently was acquired by Microsoft, which this is something that we've talked about a fair bit on the pod. They were acquired by Microsoft for $68 billion. So we've talked about that, the Microsoft acquisition of Activision Blizzard a few times over the past year or so as it's been kicking along, mainly because It's the biggest acquisition Microsoft has ever done
Yeah.
across anything. It's one of the biggest acquisitions of all time.
Yeah.
$69 billion is nothing to sniff at.
No.
It went through a huge amount of antitrust scrutiny, but eventually...
it occurred, and we're in a situation where everyone's kind of scratching their heads at like, well, including Microsoft, at like, how and why did we do this? No, and not in a bad way. It's obviously a good business, but it felt like at the time the reason was Xbox was all kind of headlong into, we're going to go subscription, we're going to go cloud gaming.
Yep.
Now that doesn't seem like it's really a viable business model for
maybe
one.
it's a little bit premature.
It's premature.
Xbox is going through all its weird, I guess, like branding arguments and like trying to decide, is Xbox like a plastic box that you purchase for $600, $700 and have in your lounge room and everything gets released exclusive for it? Or is it like a brand, you can play it on any device you have?
A ubiquitous service platform, which again, okay, keen listeners to Dan Rand would know, did I not, James, back in the day, be like, I don't get Xbox, why did Microsoft own it? What's the point? Don't think, etc., etc. Maybe they should sell it. Did I not say that? Yes. Anyway, 2, did we not talk about a horizontal services business, such as Google, when we talked about, like, what were they thinking, not putting Google Maps turn-by-turn directions on the Apple? They're a horizontal services business versus Apple, who is vertically integrated. That is where Xbox is at. Should they be if they're a horizontal services business where their games, such as Call of Duty, should be on every single platform, and Xbox Cloud should be on every single platform? Because if you are horizontal, much like you can download Apple Music on Android and Apple TV on Samsung TVs, etc., horizontal services should be horizontal, i.e. they need to be everywhere, versus like vertically integrated. When you have like hardware, you want to give people a reason to buy your hardware by having exclusives only for that hardware. Xbox don't know where they are. That's a diversion, but, you know...
No, I mean, it's on point. Obviously, this is much further in the Blizzard Activision story, but, I mean, the problem that Xbox have run into and Microsoft have run into is that, as we've talked about on Dan Rand before, the politics of the video game space and people being loyalists to, like, the plastic box that they purchased. Like, you got... And this is not just like a marginal voices. There's a lot of people who are very passionate about the PlayStation or the Xbox or whatever. And there's a bit more tribalism built into that I mean, I'm sure, I'm not going to say Microsoft didn't anticipate, but it doesn't work like Office where it makes complete sense. It's available everywhere.
Yeah.
Or Teams or... Satya Nadella has turned Microsoft into, as you described, like, a horizontal services business. Yes, they have Windows, but... He is obviously a bit more agnostic about it and is like, we want everything to be everywhere. And he definitely thinks the same thing about gaming, but the gamers have different ideas about how that should be pitched to them, which is maybe something that they would love to have been more across before they spent $69 billion on a company.
Yeah, Activision, which is actually going to be the focus. It's not Microsoft's gaming strategy.
No. So the reason I wanted to bring this up is I read this book. I thought it was good. It's about Activision Blizzard, but it's really from Blizzard's perspective. And like they were founded in the early 90s, their story all the way to now, which includes the Activision merger, but it's really from their perspective. You don't hear as much about the Activision side of it, but there are so many like fun little down around touch points. Everything from like building up this weird cultural / tech business, which was Blizzard in the early days. How you like maintain that culture going through and what happens when you go through massive acquisitions and mergers. What happens when you get thrown into like the absolute hell pit that is modern monetization and business models that were sort of inherited from SaaS businesses all the way up until, you know, eSports, which is another thing that we've touched on a few times. There's a bunch of different topics in here as applied to Blizzard that I thought would be fun to talk about.
Let's start at the start.
Yep.
What was the first big hit?
So, without spending a huge amount of time on re-litigating what the book is about and the story, just to give you a super crash course, and it's worth it if you buy this book, the first like third to a half, which is about the rise of Blizzard and all the games they released that made them such a force in terms of a company and within the industry. I mean, it's pretty straightforward business stuff. It gets really interesting once you get to the tension, the fall, the breakdown, the challenges they run into, as with every story.
A typical hero's journey.
A hero's journey. But there are going to be many of you who know exactly what Blizzard do. But they started in the 90s. They started off as like a contract hire business doing ports. So they'd take games that had already existed and move it to new platforms. Like taking a game that was for PC and building it for like Super Nintendo or whatever. They did a whole bunch of that stuff. Their first big title was Warcraft.
Were you old enough to play Super Nintendo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I'm not that much younger than you.
I'm a bit older than you.
So Warcraft was their big one. That came out in the 90s, early 90s. Diablo.
See, I played Warcraft for whatever reason. I never got into Diablo. In that, like, Warcraft, I remember it was like, join the Navy, join the Army, they said. See the world, they said. Well, I could have been out sailing. If you just kept clicking on, like, a person, their dialogue would have, like, a little gag in it.
Yep.
That was a good, fun game.
Yeah.
The Horde.
Yep.
Diablo, on the other hand.
I was actually the opposite. I didn't really play Warcraft when I was younger, but I played.
Well, Warcraft's a strategy game.
Yeah, it was a bit over my head, mate.
Whereas Diablo is more of like a click. It's a
click to kill stuff. Yeah, I played a lot of Diablo too when I was younger, for sure. So they did those, but like their big money maker and StarCraft.
StarCraft, obviously.
StarCraft was huge.
Let's just talk about StarCraft for a moment before we talk about like other things. StarCraft, which will come up again. Like this is a game for people who hate themselves.
Sure. Yep.
Like this game is. The learning curve is so high. It is so hard to win against anyone else. I mean, maybe I'm talking from my own experience here, but like StarCraft is a hard game. It's like a space war simulator where you're like battling. It's not a strategy game. When we say strategy,
sci-fi strategy game.
If you don't understand what we're saying when we say like a strategy game, it's like you view the map from on top and you kind of build out your force. Blah blah blah. But StarCraft is just completely insane insofar as like, okay, you can learn it. It has the basic fundamental game dynamics of a typical strategy game where you start with a small base and you kind of make choices to build it out. If you ever try and play that game online, you would just get wrecked so hard, so fast.
I mean, this was like and they talk about this being their design thesis from the beginning, which is not super original. Lots of game designers talk about it. It's the idea of like easy to learn, difficult to master. But StarCraft is very much one of those games where it's like deceptively relatively simple to understand. Okay, this is how you build stuff. This is what the different units do. Here's how you move them around the map. Here's how you attack stuff and do war and whatever. But if you play against some absolutely cracked South Korean guy who's been playing this for 20 years, it'd be like playing against fucking Magnus Carlsen in chess. He will destroy you. But yeah, it was a cultural sensation and hugely in South Korea. It kicked off the whole South Korean eSports scene, which is still very strong. This was like that weird... And they talk about this in the book quite a lot. The point where StarCraft came out at the same time that South Korea, democratizing, coming out of basically a military dictatorship, and were like, in much the same way as in other episodes we talked about the Taiwanese deciding on a dime they were going to get into chips... which obviously the South Koreans did to a certain extent as well.
Yeah.
But they were like...
Well, memory, yeah.
Yeah. But the South Koreans were like, all right.
We're doing eSports and pop groups.
We're doing internet. We're doing high-speed fiber broadband before anyone else does. And as a result, you had internet cafes, you had high-speed broadband connections long before most of the world got it. And what did they use it for? To game, to watch games. And as a result, you had South Korean guys who were really good at StarCraft who were like rock stars in South Korea.
Yeah, and that will continue. When we get into eSports,
we'll talk about it anyway. But that was the only thing. But the thing that really like cracked and unlocked Blizzard, which for most of its life, its early life was like a bunch of dudes, and very specifically dudes. There were no women there for a very long time, which comes up later in the book. But they released a mega hit, which was World of Warcraft.
Yeah. Which was, I would say, not the first, but maybe, I think still in my lifetime, possibly biggest gaming panic.
Yeah, I mean...
When it comes to mainstream gaming panic...
It's kind of hard to...
maybe GTA somewhere in there, but like...
Grand Theft Auto and like...
But I feel like WoW was the first time you would see Today Tonight dedicating a hot 8 minutes to a mum who's lost her child to World of Warcraft.
Yeah. It wasn't the first massively multiplayer RPG. There were other ones before that. In fact, the book talks about that they were really inspired by EverQuest, which was like one of the first big ones. And then obviously, you had online ones like RuneScape. A lot of people were playing those back in the day.
And still are.
And still, I don't want to know about that, but I'm sure there are. But anyway, WoW came out and it was like a complete cultural sensation. And also, it debuted a relatively new and massively popularized a business model, which was you pay X amount for the box to install it, and then you pay $10 a month to play it, which was extremely novel and now kind of underpins Western economies.
Yeah.
The American economy is powered on that rationale.
Well, I mean,
Weird
as we just
entertainment experiences at a subscription prices.
as we discussed, it also accounts for a significant percentage of Apple's services revenue,
Yep.
which, as we discussed previously, were that to decrease, could end the entire world.
Could end the world's economy. But it's interesting to think about, like, a massive chunk of Apple's revenue is based on business models which you can trace directly back to World of Warcraft when it landed in 2004.
Yeah.
And you're right. I was in high school. I remember, I never got into it. I never played it. Like, I literally never played it.
I had a friend's brother he created a character for me in an intent, like attempting to explain why I should start. He's like, we'll create a character for you. And he showed me his cool character, as well as like the bottom third of the screen was taken up by little boxes that you could click on at any one time. Like there was like 9 billion moves or items or whatever it was, so that he could, like, I don't know, hack at a tree to kind of harvest some wood that he was intending to do for the next 4 hours.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, it was a specific taste. In fact, there's an interesting thing which comes up later in the book, which I thought was kind of fun, which is, so World of Warcraft, it was released in 2004, but it still gets updates. Like they release new DLC every couple of years.
I mean,
which
a
means
few years ago, I'd see ads on buses for the latest DLC, if not
like,
still today.
They still today. Like their most recent one just came out, and it was all over buses in Sydney.
Yeah.
That's 20 years of content.
Yeah.
That's being released at like a relatively regular cadence. There's still a lot of people that play it. It's come down massively from its peak because a lot of people have moved on to other games, and other people have gotten married and have children and families and can't be paying $10 a month forever. But it's still a big earner and still going. But as it's developed, they've improved it and gotten rid of a lot of the annoying friction, which is what you were kind of talking about, where like there's rows and rows of buttons to click and like tons of menus and tons of crap, which kind of made sense when it was gamers back in 2004 who were pretty like locked in, canny nerds, but now it could be anyone. So they've gotten rid of all of that friction. But now they've released World of Warcraft Classic, which you can also play for, and it is the game as it existed back in 2004.
Right.
So you can play it as it was without all the quality of life improvements that it's done. But there's like a funny dimension to it, which I buy, which is like back in the day to like do a World of Warcraft raid or whatever.
Yeah.
It was like an actual act of coordination.
Yeah. It was like a week in the making.
It was a week in the making. You needed a guy that was you were communicating on all different platforms.
Yeah, you possibly had your clan possibly had their own forum.
You needed to like know the people, and like because it was such a big task to take down these like bosses in a raid, and it was 20 people working there. It was like being a fucking drill sergeant in the Marines, and if not everyone was pulling their weight, you might fail. Whereas now it's like completely streamlined. They don't want anyone to bounce off, so it's like really easy to match make. But as a result, people were like, actually, it was kind of cool back in the day.
Well, this is a big down round thesis. It's the destruction of community is what we're talking about here.
Well,
streamlined through tech. As we remove friction, maybe we remove connection. Just a little thought.
I think it's actually true because the modern, now that we're in, and we're going to talk about this a bit, but like now that the modern way that games and all kinds of software work, which is like you don't want to alienate anyone at any point. Everything should be for everyone. Everyone comes in. If someone bounces off your game or your app or whatever, and you've got all these analytics dashboards, someone doesn't finish a transaction in your e-commerce platform.
Yeah, or like someone doesn't upgrade their sword.
Yeah, something has gone horribly wrong and you shouldn't have alienated that person. Whereas back in the day, it was like, if you didn't have a bare level of social skills and you couldn't like ingratiate yourself to some World of Warcraft clan, you were just not going to get like this powerful fucking sword or whatever. And it was just a different kind of alienating era of the internet. Well, not alienating, but like way higher, like steeper learning curve, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I would say that it also like, but it allowed people to actually form genuine communities and like make relationships, like one-to-one personal relationships. Whereas now you have this kind of weird, like diffuse thing where, as you say, you're match made with people.
Yeah.
And maybe you can add them as a quote unquote friend, but like,
and what
otherwise you're just thrown off with another random group of people. And like your kind of content feed is like an algorithm. It's not the same. It's not your friends giving you information, blah, 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 blah. It's like you're more just kind of another kind of part of the algorithm.
Yeah, and on a basic level, it makes complete sense because it's like
it's efficiency.
You bought WoW, you want to play a game, you get matched with someone else that wants to play a game.
Yeah,
it's like market making, connected, no problem. You waited 5 seconds, there were no problems, and there's no barriers. But as a result, you lose that weird human element of back in the day when you wanted to do a WoW raid, having to like fuck around on a forum and find someone who was in your time zone and like willing
people
to
say I'm old-fashioned for saying that maybe doing the same thing with dating on dating apps is bad. Well, just saying.
Back in the day, you had to struggle. You had to go on a forum to find a date. Anyway,
back in the day, maybe you found a date or a WoW raid partner through friends and family, and therefore reinforced your local community.
Sure, there we go. Exactly. There's the book goes into lots of people getting married to people they used to do WoW raids with. I don't know if I can endorse that kind of behavior, but it is, in the abstract, interesting. Anyway, but the point is that Blizzard were like loved by gamers. They had a real I'm not going to say cult, but they were considered to make really high quality games for like very high minded PC gamers. StarCraft, Warcraft.
Yeah, but I guess to really dig into that as an example, my understanding, and I'm not obviously deeply ingratiated with it, but like the game designers, when they make slight changes to like certain elements of the game, it'd be like someone internal at Blizzard who was like a game designer who's responsible for like the game balance would like make an announcement, and on all the forums and like everyone was aware who like within Blizzard was responsible for these roles.
It was like it had a real parasocial connection with the people. They all knew who the community managers and like the designers were.
Yeah.
And they were all out on the forums and talking to each other. There was that real community feel. But World of Warcraft basically elevated them to the stratosphere. They had met within months. They had 5, 10, 20 million subscribers, $10 a month. Automatically doing the math in your head, that's like a huge business.
Yeah.
And they were doing well before, but
also recurring revenue, as we've talked.
Recurring revenue
before. The beauty of subscription is that you can rely on that revenue to come. You know that revenue is coming. You know what your churn is. Therefore, you can project out your revenue perfectly, which makes it very easy to, for example, get loans, or for a private equity firm or whatever it is to be like give you a valuation, and a much higher valuation than just I sell a game and we sell heaps at first and it slowly trickles off, and then hopefully in 8 years' time we sell another game.
Yep. So at that, and this is some fun down around areas. After World of Warcraft came out, Blizzard were owned by Vivendi, who are a French company, and they had an interactive brand, like Vivendi Interactive was kind of like the subsidiary, and it owned Blizzard and it owned a bunch of like smaller game studios. But Vivendi were had been for years trying to flog their interactive portfolio, because it's worth knowing Vivendi was a French utilities company. They owned a bunch of like water assets and a handful of other things, and then
water assets, fantastic. Once again, you get very predictable revenue.
Yep. Well, exactly. They own a bunch of other like infrastructure and utilities assets, and for some reason, in addition to a bunch of other kind of like entertainment-ish assets, also owned this interactive thing. Blizzard was a massive outperformer. They wanted to sell it. They wanted to get rid of their Vivendi Interactive assets
because this shit is never going to last.
But it was mostly because it wasn't a huge fit for the rest of their portfolio. Some of But they were basically set on, you can't just buy Blizzard, which we know are killing it because of WoW. You need to buy these 20 other studios, most of which are failing. We're not just selling Blizzard. It's a package deal, folks. Because, and the book goes into this, but they had been ping-ponged around between different owners for years. They were owned by an educational software company, then owned by like a conglomerate that ended up being a vehicle for fraud. There's some great corporate wrangling stories in there. But eventually, Activision, which, as I said, Call of Duty, Guitar Hero, a bunch of other titles as well, which you would probably know, run by a guy named Bobby Kotick, who was kind of like a villain in the gaming industry. If you're not in games, if you are in games, you're probably familiar with Bobby Kotick because he is kind of like, and has been for 20 years. He was a CEO of Activision, and then the CEO of Activision Blizzard once they merged. He's considered by gamers to be a guy who's a money man, businessman, doesn't care about the medium at all, only cares about basically squeezing blood from a stone until franchises die.
Right.
So,
I know the name as like a name that's held up as evil, but I actually don't know that much about the bloke.
the example that always keeps coming up is that he was obsessed with just like yearly cadences for releases. So Guitar Hero, Tony Hawk Pro Skater was an Activision game. Release a game every single year.
What a soundtrack, folks.
What a soundtrack. Release a game every single year, no matter what. Do anything on the production side to make sure that there is, at Christmas, a new Tony Hawk's game, a new Guitar Hero game. And if you could do it every quarter, we would do that. But as a result, people get tired of the franchises. They did with Guitar Hero. Remember back in the day when fucking every share house had Guitar Hero 3 and
and everyone could play Dragon Force or whatever was the hard one.
Yeah, totally. And that just completely vanished. It's basically because he bled the franchise dry and no one wanted to buy them anymore. At least like, Guitar Hero Metallica, Guitar Hero Aerosmith, every possible edition, multiple a year. And people were like, I can't do any more of that.
I cannot continue. Can somebody help me budget?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, and, it comes through in the book. Obviously, the book is kind of anti-Bobby Kotick in its orientation, that he's a bit cooked. But it is kind of funny where they contrast Blizzard being exactly what we were talking about before, a bunch of guys who are really plugged into the forums, they're gamer-focused. Their main focus is not profits, but making great games, and the profits will come. And then they contrast that with Bobby Kotick, doesn't care about games. All the executives he hires are like fast-moving consumer goods executives. So he's like hiring people who used to work for Procter & Gamble, like laundry detergent marketers, and basically being like, there's no huge difference between a packet of laundry detergent and Call of Duty Modern Warfare. They're fundamentally kind of the same thing. They're a product you make, you market it, you support it.
You maximize revenue per customer.
Maximize revenue per customer.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Yeah.
And that has worked for him.
Yeah.
He's produced a huge amount of money. But gamers are kind of like, you're ruining Call of Duty with your release cadence. You wouldn't say that about laundry powder.
No, exactly. You want your laundry powder to be updated regularly.
You want it to be improved whenever new discoveries are made in the realm of laundry powder.
You're telling me you do not want innovation? Actually, one thing with laundry powder, dishwasher detergent.
Yep.
And like, obviously it's fantastic nowadays. You got the 3-in-1. God knows what it all does. But I don't like how they stick together. The like pouch things.
Okay.
I don't like how they...
the dishwashing...
The dishwashing, the tablet-y things.
In the bag.
In the bag, yeah.
Because they're kind of like that mushy...
They're that kind of plasticky thing that you know that if water touches it, it starts to melt.
Yeah, which is, yeah.
But like...
They stick together in the bag.
The bag, and then you rip them apart. You have to rip them apart in the bag, and I'm worried that I will burst.
Here's a question for you. Mm-hmm. Is there any value whatsoever to like the compartmentalized? Like they've got the red circle, the blue half, and the yellow half?
Well, apparently, allegedly, you don't need to put the drying agent. If you use like a proper... like a red dot thing. The red dot thing, I believe, is like to dry it quickly.
Okay.
There's like a drying... There's a proper word for this that you would know. But there's like one thing that makes sure that when you open it, all the shit is dry.
Yep.
And it's like a chemical, which sounds now I think about it, not healthy. It might have something to do with like potentially the sperm count.
Yeah, that's reducing sperm count. I mean, my main thing is like, do those three elements?
There's usually like a powder element, then like a yellowy thing, and then in the middle is the red dot.
The red dot, the blue like powder or blue liquid, and then the yellow. Do they need to be separated, or is that just like
a bullshit thing?
Is it just bullshit marketing where it's like, okay, well, you fell for it. You were like, oh, the red dot helps the plates be dry.
Well, no, the dishwasher told me don't put the dry wash in, like, because there's a separate thing. There's a separate compartment. Don't put this in if you're using the tablets with the red dot. That's what they told me.
No, I accept that. It's like, but do they need
rinse aid.
Do they need to be separate in the blob, or is it just
doesn't seem to make sense?
Or is it just that because the water goes through and mixes it all up?
But maybe there's different levels of the silicone thing that melts. Or
have they worked out through, I guess, like customer surveys and stuff that people need them separated? So you're kind of the Western mind loves to compartmentalize things. This is what we're talking about. They don't like everything apps.
We don't like exactly.
They need
a separate brand for everything.
We can't have WeChat.
We need experts.
We need something that's for this, something for that. So it's like the red thing is to keep your plates dry. The blue is to clean it, and then the yellow, that's for like the lemony scent. And just like internally, you're kind of like, okay, that makes sense.
Well, that looks like technology to me.
So they're doing something that's technological. It's better than just having powder.
Yeah, or a tablet.
Everything in its right place.
Everything.
Anyway, that diversion, but something to chew on. So Activision Blizzard merged in 2008. They became gaming giant, as I said, one of the, if not the biggest gaming stock on the American stock exchanges. And they went through a lot of the same processes we were just alluding to, the extreme business-focused mindset of we need to get to a position where we've hired up that you can release a World of Warcraft expansion every year, if not more, to keep people paying, keep people grinding along. And their kind of self-professed hippie rock and roll game design mindset where it's like, we just love the fans. We love putting on our conference in Anaheim every year.
Yeah.
We're
gonna scream at each other over balance.
Yeah. Making sure the gamers are catered to, and the filthy casuals are drawn in by how exciting our world is, and less on selling more and more subscriptions.
Yeah.
But there are a couple of things that particularly stood out. So if you want to read about all that, the book's great. It's called Play Nice. But there's a couple of things that I think really elevated to down round areas that I wanted to flag. The first one was eSports, which we talked about in the past as when we did an episode about it. We went to Fortress and recorded a live intro, which all of you loved based on the feedback we got. But
you loved us recording into our phones.
It's a great internal view of everything we were talking about in that episode, which is like eSports is fundamentally very stupid.
Yes. There's
an audience for it, and it's probably a growing audience.
Yeah.
But it is never, ever going to come even a stone's throw from doing like NFL numbers.
Doing A-League numbers.
Exactly. It's just not going to happen. And it's very interesting to see the internal Blizzard wrangling because they didn't invent it. And there's a great anecdote, which I'll relay now. StarCraft was basically the first big esports game.
Yeah, the one that is for people who hate themselves.
In South Korea, it became big completely independently of Blizzard. They didn't know what esports were. They didn't know why people would want to watch someone playing a game. They were all about the players. Became huge in South Korea. Became huge in South Korean internet cafes. People would play competitively. Then all of a sudden it was broadcast. There were arenas that were playing live StarCraft. As I said, the players became celebrities locally. South Korea set up basically a government-owned promotions/regulatory body for esports.
You heard that right, folks.
Within Korea, that would handle broadcast rights and would handle all this sort of stuff. And there's a very, very funny anecdote in the book where Blizzard became aware of this and they suddenly were like, we should be getting a little bit of money from this.
Yeah, but picture, I guess, if you're the AFL and people are playing AFL, you're like, we own the rights to the AFL, right?
Yeah.
Like, we need money. If you're the NFL or whatever, like, you obviously own the rights to people playing the NFL. bit more complicated than that. You own all the teams, etc., etc. In a way, you have licenses with all the teams.
Yeah.
And you decide who plays, who doesn't. But like, if NFL is being played, you expect to make money for it. However,
Well, it's complicated.
it's complicated because like if American football is being played,
the NFL does not own the concept of American football.
Exactly.
AFL does not own Aussie rules.
However, the difference being that like you could argue like the characters in the game is more like Disney, right?
Yeah.
It's like Mickey Mouse. If Mickey Mouse is fighting Goofy,
All the UI elements.
yeah, like if someone else is streaming that and making money off it, you'd be like, that's my IP.
Yeah.
Except obviously it's not quite that either.
It's kind of, it's sort of like, what if there was a bunch of people running around in a field who, they were in a Collingwood and Melbourne kit,
Yeah.
and they had the AFL logo everywhere,
Yeah.
and they were filming it and distributing
It's kind of like that.
and collecting revenue.
The fake T20.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like,
the fake T20
and then they were like,
teams for-
But the point is that this was happening.
Blizzard were like, it's
Broad-
our game, it's our IP, it's being broadcast, people are making money off it.
This is the mid.
Can we make
This
some
is
money?
the mid 2000s. And there's a great anecdote which I love, which is a bunch of Blizzard guys went to Seoul, went to South Korea, sat down with the people from this promotion / regulator / league. It's like a weird
With some government-
private public thing that was going on over there.
Very hard for my Western brain
Again,
to
South
comprehend.
Korea. I mean, we know that K-pop was a similar sort of thing. I mean, K-pop has a massive amount of Korean government involvement. Well, it's the same in Thailand. Thai restaurants, the government is huge in getting Thai restaurants to spread internationally. They find what they're good at. They get a government.
I mean, mate, the entertainment industry in Australia is like
true.
about Film Australia. You know?
Screen Australia film. Like, it's totally equivalent. They do it in a real hypercharged manner that the arts industry in Australia I don't think would ever. Anyway, they sat down with these South Korean eSports executives. The Koreans seemed baffled by the fact that Blizzard was trying to claim some degree of ownership or licensing rights over the thing. And one of the guys said, I assume through a translator, "We're FIFA and you're the ball." Which is very... Because, again, you got to kind of hand it to Blizzard in the sense where it's like, there's so much IP built in. It's definitely more than like a Wilson football or whatever.
Yeah.
But
They got owned.
funny, they got owned. So it eventually leads them later in the book. Activision Blizzard acquired Major League Gaming, which was a esports organization. Phenomenal name, terrible tech stack. It was going up against Twitch.
No, I think this is an important line to draw from that. So you're Blizzard, you release these games that you wanted for gamers. You see that, hold on, these things are getting popular. Hold on, people are watching other people play these games. Hold on, this is like sport. We need to... There's a future, and this is like, cyber utopian, where the new sport will be computer games. Computer games are the new sport. We need to own that. Like, we'd be absolute fools and idiots to not be able to own that. We're creating the game and the rules and the league. So throughout the future, we need to work on a strategy that means that we own that when inevitably there comes a point where watching computer games is the same as watching the NFL.
Yeah. And they tried to do that with the Overwatch League. So
Yeah.
Overwatch is another Blizzard game. I believe you played it.
I did. That was a game that I was heavily invested in.
Yeah.
For that time, it was before I had kids, would you believe? But I also had a fair bit of cash and time.
Okay. And you...
those who don't know, I was at one point a professional musician.
You were a professional musician. You were touring, and you were playing a shitload of Overwatch.
That's right.
For many, that's a dream life.
Yeah, and I made it to Grandmaster.
Anyway, so
It was a tank.
Activision Blizzard bought Major League Gaming. They invested in the Overwatch League, and there's a big part in the book where they go through, their process of being like, this is going to be massive. They tied up a bunch of partnerships with Twitch, later with YouTube, with a bunch of sponsors. There's a lot of description of like how fucking stupid the sales process was for what rights were going to be maintained by Activision Blizzard versus advertisers versus like the teams. Because yes, they they were selling licenses for city-based esports teams. Like
they went about it in exactly the right way, I will say. Well, not exactly the right way, but rather than, I guess, previously in esports, right, it was just like just random teams.
Yeah, FaZe Clan and shit.
Yeah, and like this was like, we're going to have like the LA team, and I mean, this is in the case of Overwatch. They really thought it through and went for like, this is the LA team, this is their home stadium, this is the friggin' New York team, blah, 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 San Francisco team, whatever it is, the Seoul team. In the end, and you know, they tried to make it like sports, like they play at Barclay or whatever it is, like in these huge arenas, which is the right way to do it. And you know, these guys came, the funniest bit was like, they started with like the quote unquote esports athletes like running out. And you know, we're talking about esports Overwatch guys.
Yeah. It's not an NFL run out.
They don't quite have the swag.
They are
as a linebacker.
I would say they're utterly swagless, actually.
But yeah, these teams were selling for heaps, like the rights to the LA Overwatch team, because it was like
$8 million is basically what $8 million each were.
Yeah, and this is also, you got to remember, like kind of crypto-y NFT era, and there's a lot of like, this is the future of technology kind of vibes and commerce and this, that, and the other. The other kind of vaguely funny thing that started to happen though with the teams that wanted to win is that just basically every team just ended up all being South Koreans.
Yeah. Well, you know.
It's like kind of like if you play like table tennis or whatever, it's like Vietnam or whatever is second best, but they're all Chinese.
Yeah, totally. No, absolutely. Yeah. No, and it didn't work. And like, you know, you can also come back to the fact where it's like, yes, they did it all theoretically right, like city-based teams, but in most leagues around the world, whether it be, you know, the AFL, the NRL here, or like the NBA, MLB, there is like, or definitely with like European football, there is like a history to these clubs.
Oh yeah,
like even in like the really mercenary American way of handling sports franchises, where it's like, okay, we're going to move the Brooklyn Dodgers to LA or whatever.
I mean, Las Vegas has an ice hockey team. That's a bit weird.
You know, yeah, and there's weird stuff that comes up, obviously. But still, even though the LA Dodgers were relocated across the country, or you know, the North Sydney Bears are being relocated to Perth, they still have like a history that's relatively long, as in at least decades, if not more than 100 years, in the case of like, you know, some football teams.
Well, I mean, two very quick examples. Well, A, the only reason I support the Sydney Swans is because my grandfather was from South Melbourne. But B, I watched the footy on the weekend, a few weekends ago, the grand final. Brisbane were playing, didn't think about it, stayed in Fitzroy. It's the Brisbane Lions. They merged with goddamn Fitzroy like more than like a couple of decades ago.
Yeah.
Swamped with Lions fans. So there's a history there.
Yeah, there's history. Whereas, like, you know, if you're the LA fucking, I don't even know what they called.
No, God knows.
Yeah, so they had really like,
LA. Yeah,
they were a bit extreme. Like, you know, stick with animals, folks.
Yeah,
animals,
not animals.
But this
Fury
was like,
and shit like this.
It's like LA Fury and like the New York Slam, and shit like that, like that kind of vibe. Anyway, it didn't work. So very funny that it basically completely crashed and burned. One of the biggest video game companies in the world couldn't make it work. Esports, as we've said, it still has like an audience, still makes money.
Got an audience.
It's got a future.
Before we move on, it again worth pointing out, one of the key issues is that it is nearly impossible to understand what the hell is going on.
Yeah, and this
in particular for non-gamers.
They
non like passionate about that particular game.
The book talks about this at length. That all the executives were like, at the end of the day, if you watch a football game, even if you don't understand the intricacies of like American football or Aussie rules or
soccer,
rugby league or soccer,
ball go in goal or ball go over line.
It may take you a while to figure out what offside means, but you will understand, who has the ball right now and what do they want to do with it. They need to put it in that net. Whereas, like Overwatch especially.
Oh, man. Because you're talking about any team can have a combination of like 20 various characters. Every character has a bunch of different abilities. All those abilities, they each have a different ultimate. There's like a whole bunch of different, like, you know, you got healers, you've got like attack characters, you got tanks who are shielding, and together they can kind of combine all their skills together, etc. And also the camera's jumping around between like each of these different characters' perspective, and you're supposed to understand who's on top and who's behind and who's
Yeah.
closer to their power level and blah, blah, blah. It's just obviously completely... And as someone who understands the game, when I used to watch it, I was like, I don't understand who's
It's
winning.
completely... It looks psychotic. It's all just like flashing colors and like people moving around insanely. Like, I mean, like,
And then just dying.
it's all about movement, right? And like really fast.
Well,
and if you're
at that level, apparently, like at the top level, it's even less about like individual skill and more just like a team drilling a strat, you know?
yeah. And which is less fun to watch than like that's the biggest man I've ever seen, and he's carrying the ball and he's running with it.
Yeah, or that dude is fast.
That
dude is fast as hell.
that's Lindy. That
dude just tricked him by like holding the ball out to one side. And he thought he was going to go that way. He went that way.
He faked out.
Like, we get that. Like, everyone in the world gets that.
Yeah. So, all right, that's the esports angle. And the other angle I thought was funny, to wrap it up, was the evolution from, like, the traditional gaming models to more like mobile gaming. And talking about, like, that super player-focused, we want to make the best games for this hardcore set. And, like, you know, we want to make WoW, we want to make StarCraft, we want to make Warcraft, and these very sophisticated strategy games or whatever, in conjunction with the rise of mobile gaming and like spending a shitload of money on gems. That Activision Blizzard and now Microsoft ended up buying King, which are the company that makes Candy Crush. So that's where Candy Crush lives now, under Microsoft.
Great.
Great information. Should put it in teams.
But also, again, like, what's such an Adela think about that?
I'm sure, you know, it's monetizable, ongoing, recurring revenue. He probably loves it. But the thing that I thought was really interesting, which I don't
think he thinks about it that much.
No, no, totally. He's not. There's nobody that directly reports to him that is across Candy Crush. Potentially, like the Xbox and like Microsoft Gaming.
Phil Schiller.
Not Phil Schiller. Phil Spencer. Phil Schiller's Apple.
Yeah.
Or was Apple. Phil Spencer it's probably part of his slide deck at those meetings.
Yeah.
But I don't think Satya is that involved in Candy Crush specifically. But there was
don't get me wrong. Like, Candy Crush is generating significant net profit.
Yeah. There was a big thing where it's like Activision Blizzard figured out we release these insanely expensive titles and Candy Crush is booking hundreds of millions in revenue a month.
Yeah.
For something that...
And all we really need to do is just, like, increase server capacity.
Yeah, and add new levels, new patterns. It was a real, I think, wake-up call. But the thing that I thought was interesting, which I hadn't really thought about a lot, is there's a very telling anecdote where they talked about... They released the Diablo game on mobile that all the core audience absolutely hated. So, like, you're releasing a shitty microtransaction game, which is what it was.
Yep.
But they made it with NetEase, which is a Tencent developer. But they were talking about the fact that the Chinese developer was pushing for really, really hardcore microtransaction stuff. And the Blizzard purists were like, oh, no.
Couldn't possibly.
We don't want to put 5 different types of gems. But then the book goes into the fact, which I think I might have known, but I didn't really contemplate it, that the reason that especially Chinese games are so packed with microtransactions and Western games are at least a little bit tactful about it, is that like the traditional business model is that in Western markets is that you would, you know, have a Nintendo 64 or whatever and you would pay $80 for a game and you would play that for a while and then you'd pay $80 for a new game. And great. And now they're trying to and have successfully migrated people onto more of a, you can play for free but get microtransactions, less natural. But for the Chinese market and other Asian markets, they came up playing games by the hour in internet cafes.
Yeah.
So it's a really natural fit to go from I pay for 2 hours to I pay for gems that keep me going for X number of hours and help me win for that long. I thought that was interesting.
Which also explains kind of like how something like StarCraft could become so popular, because realistically back in the day, if you wanted to play multiplayer StarCraft, most people didn't have the home internet connection to facilitate that. You had to do it at a cyber cafe, right?
Yeah,
You had to play LAN.
that's it.
And
Yeah.
if the whole culture like was around LAN, that makes sense that, LAN cost $2 or $3 an hour. Therefore, paying per hour or per week or whatever makes far more sense as opposed to like us in the West who were just horrified when when Adobe went to like monthly subscription.
Yep. Totally. So I thought that was interesting. And now, obviously Candy Crush is part of the family. They bought that, and they've been trying to struggle through this weird transition from games take as long as it takes to make them, sometimes years. It's for a core audience, and then maybe you make it more accessible for other people to enlarge the pie, as I would say, to like this more hyper monetized software as a service kind of model. So the book kind of ends with the Microsoft acquisition and how them being very hopeful with it, and then the mass layoffs that came out soon after that, and sort of ends on a dim note. But I thought, it's a worthwhile read, especially to get a sense of not just gaming, but sort of how tech has evolved over the past couple of decades.
Thank you for joining us on the Down Round Book Club.
This is Down Around Book Club. First and last edition ever.
I'll read a book.
We'll never talk about a book again, unless it is The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People.
Yeah.
How
Atomic Habits 2.
How to make friends and influence people.
2.